And
well, hold on a second, Mr. Hood.
yep.
There are rules. There's the AIP, the Aeronautical Information Package, that relates to LAHSO, correct?
Senator, you'll actually find that the source of the procedures for LAHSO is enshrined in legislation.
Right.
So you have the Air Services Act,
yep,
under which you've got Civil Aviation Safety Regulation Part 172, and the third tier of legislation is the Part 172 Manual of Standards, or the MOS. And I suppose back in around about 1995, when this was authored, the government thought that so significant is the operation of crossing runways that it should be enshrined in legislation. So,
and let's make it clear, the US and Canada allow LAHSOs, but a lot of other countries, I think Europe, doesn't allow LAHSO.
That's my understanding, Senator, is it's a practice in the United States and in Canada.
But not in a lot of other countries.
But not in the rest of the world, that's correct, Senator.
Right, so it means that most of the world has such a concern about LAHSOs, about crossing runways, they don't even allow it, correct?
I'm not sure, Senator. The other issue associated with that, of course, is that the majority of busy airports in the remainder of the world don't operate cross runways. It's largely parallel runways now, and of course Australia is moving towards parallel runway operations.
Okay, but the fact is most of the world doesn't allow LAHSO, apart from the US and Canada.
US, Canada and Australia, to my knowledge, are the only countries that permit LAHSO.
Right.
So in actual fact, the procedures for LAHSO are enshrined in legislation, in the third tier of legislation, in the Manual of Standards for Part 172. And then the procedures, as the Senator pointed out, are then extrapolated into the pilot document, which is the AIP, and also into the Air Traffic Control document, which is the Manual of Air Traffic Services. So, as I said, 3 actions on receipt of Senator Xenophon's letter. One is that I conducted a review of the way in which the procedure is being utilised today. 2, I've asked for a deeper dive review by our safety area, and Dr Weaver is heading that up. And 3, I had a look at the qualitative and quantitative data to see whether that's telling me anything about, concerns from the pilot community.
Excuse me, I've got a bad head cold, so I'm perhaps a bit congested. I'm not following things too well. There are rules about crosswinds, because they say you can't land if there's a crosswind of more than 20 knots, correct? Or if there's a tailwind or a downwind of more than 5 knots.
20 knots crosswind, that's correct,
okay,
Senator.
Which makes it a bit bloody awkward at Bankstown these days.
Okay, so what happened at Melbourne Airport, for some reason that I cannot fathom, which really concerns me in terms of how this was allowed to occur, is that pilots were landing beyond that buffer, that 20-kilometre crosswind, 5-kilometre tailwind or downwind. That's what actually happened. Let's, with my congested head, I'm just trying to understand this. What happened there was that in breach of your own rules in terms of cross runways, in terms of these land and hold short operations, for some reason it went outside. There were aircraft landing outside that safety, those safety parameters. Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no answer, Senator, if I may.
All right, how about I help you with this?
No, can I finish this, please, Senator? So the rule set in the legislation and in the AIP is not as, in my view, is not as prescriptive as it should be in relation to the passive runway and pilots' request to use the passive runway.
On what basis do you have that interpretation? Have you any legal advice in respect of that, or is this your interpretation?
Senator, as I said, I received your letter and I'm doing my best from an air traffic control point of view to ensure that we operate safely.
But hang on, there's a 20-kilometre crosswind, 5-kilometre downwind or tailwind. That's the parameter, yes or no?
That's the parameter for the active runway, Senator.
Okay. And is it for the active runway or for both runways?
For the active runway. So in Melbourne...
So if it's for the so-called the secondary runway, that doesn't apply?
For the secondary runway, which is I think where the issue is and where I think there needs to be greater prescription, the legislation and the AIP is silent, as in if a pilot requests runway 27 in Melbourne, so you get a pilot request for the passive runway, then the legislation is silent on that. Sorry, Senator?
Pausing there. If you get a request for what you describe as the passive runway, it becomes an active runway.
Sorry. Well, it does. I mean, look, can we just drill this down?
Playing with
Firstly, on what basis has that interpretation of the active and so-called passive runways been reached by you or by anyone else in Air Services Australia? Because it seems to me on the face of it, there has been a clear breach of that AIP, firstly. Secondly, what I'm concerned of is that you made mention if the pilot requests it. Now, you ought to know, Mr. Hood, that when a pilot is approaching an airfield, that the air traffic controller says, "Do you want to use this runway?" I mean, it's usually they're responding to a request. That's what actually happens. It's not a question of the pilot saying, "I feel like landing on this particular runway." They rely on advice from your professional air traffic controllers. Is that a fair summary?
That'd be a fair summary, Senator.
Okay, so it's not quite right to say it's what the pilot requests. The pilot is actually saying, "Do you want to land on this one?" Is that what actually occurs?
It does happen in both circumstances. So we can sometimes say to the pilot, 27's available if you prefer that, or in fact sometimes the pilot may request it. For example, in Melbourne, if you land on 09, then you're obviously going to roll closer to the terminal, for example.
Okay, but in terms of that, when an air traffic controller is offering a runway to a pilot about to land, are details given of the crosswinds and the tailwinds?
Yes, Senator, they are.
Right.
I think, sorry.
So they're aware if it might be 25 knots or 30 knots or whatever?
That's correct, Senator.
Right. But you're on final approach. You're obviously going to listen to, you're on the final approach. It's pretty busy, and you'd expect that they would be guided by the advice of the air traffic controller.
That's correct, Senator.
Right. But Ms. Dave, and I accept that Ms. Dave answered the questions in good faith on the 20th of October. She assumed, I think it was reasonable for her to assume, that there would have been a risk assessment and a safety case. And she said, and develop a safety case, yes, in addition to asking a risk assessment. There was no risk assessment and safety case before the rules were changed at Melbourne Airport, were there? So,
Senator, the current rules go back, the last change to these was made about 2 years ago, and I'm as interested as you are in terms of how those rules came to change, and that's what I've asked Dr Weaver to have a look at.
Well, did someone unilaterally in Melbourne say we're changing the rules? Because I can tell you that it's not just one pilot. I imagine it's quite a few pilots who are particularly concerned in terms of what occurred. They were really worried about it. They thought that the risk of something going wrong and of a go-around with those crosswinds could have led to a mid-air collision. That has been put to me.
So, Senator, as I said, I looked in the interests of aviation safety at your concerns, and I have taken immediate action to ensure that the procedure is amended and that the passive runway does not operate in excess of 20 knots.
Right.
And the other action I've taken is asked Dr Weaver to have a look at that change process 2 years ago. I've got a terms of reference for that. I'm happy to table that as well.
That would be useful. That would be useful, but I'm just...
Can I just ask a very simple question then? Do you have a list of how many passenger planes, which I could have been on or the chair could have been on, that actually landed in excess of those requirements?
Senator, certainly I'm hoping that the review will be able to provide me with that data.
Well, I think
of how many occasions
you haven't answered the
used it
question.
last year.
Will you be able to provide us how many passenger movements?
Probably not the passenger numbers, but certainly
But the aircraft?
have a look at
We'd
how
have a
many
rough
days
idea.
and how many aircraft.
How many
movements.
aircraft and what type of... So we get a rough idea of how many thousands of passengers would have been subject to this. So I write to you as a result of a pilot contacting me with this concern. I write to Ms Stabe on the 4th of November. I think you would have received it on the 4th or the 5th, Ms Stabe? Yep. And when did the temporary local instruction rescinding what was occurring at Tullamarine, this is TLI 140291, when did that temporary instruction come into force?
It came into effect on the 14th of November.
Right. So within 10 days. So can I suggest to you that has there been a cause and effect in terms of the correspondence you received?
Absolutely,
Yes,
Senator.
Yes, Senator.
It scares me that I write a letter. I mean, I shouldn't have to write you letters about something as important as this. I would have thought, how the hell did this happen in the first place? There was clearly a breach of the AIP. And in fact, I raised this on the 20th of October, so it went on for about 3 weeks, didn't it?
Senator, as I said, we trawled through the data to see whether we had any other ATSB REPCON reports or any other reports made through the air traffic control system to see whether this was considered to be an issue.
But Mr Hood, presumably someone said we're going to go, went rogue, presumably, said we're going to go beyond the 20-kilometre threshold and the 20-knot threshold and the 5-knot threshold. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Ms Stabe. I'm pretty sure it wasn't you. What happened in the chain of command that somehow that was authorised?
And that's what I hope to find out also, Senator, through the review conducted by Dr Weaver, and I'm happy to report back to this forum.
It's quite a significant issue, isn't it, from your point of view?
Anything to do with safety, Senator. I'm the accountable manager in Air Services Australia for air traffic control and the safety of air traffic control, and I take that seriously.
Going outside those parameters without authorisation was really pushing the envelope, wasn't it?
Senator, I'll be interested to see how that came about.
Right? Did any air traffic, and can I say, just so that you know, there is an issue of retribution, which I want to get to in a minute, no air traffic controllers have actually contacted me. I have to try and get my information through other means. Did any air traffic controllers make a complaint about this?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Can you find out for me?
Certainly, Senator. That would normally be reported through our internal reporting system, and when we did our trawling for data, I didn't find any of our internal reports raised on LAHSO.
Because just a cheerio to any air traffic controllers, if anyone has been heavied,
Senator, we've discussed this before.
Well, no, we're going to discuss it again today because I need to ask you some more questions on that. And I appreciate what you said, but I need to drill down on a few things. So I can't take that any further, but you do agree it was extraordinary that there was, for some reason at Tullamarine, for a number of weeks, a number of months, there was a change in protocols without any risk assessment, without any safety case.
It appears it goes back 2 years, and it appears
2 years?
It looks like the last change was made 2 years ago, and it's inconsistent. It appears to be inconsistent with our current safety management practices.
So how has this gone on for 2 years? How did you guys not know about it?
I can't tell you that, Senator.
Doesn't that
Should be able to
relate
answer
to,
further
is that
questions
a
after we
systemic
complete
issue
the
that Dr Weaver or others will be looking at?
That's part of the review.
How quickly will that review be undertaken?
As soon as
Commenced. We signed off the terms of reference for it this week, and the first delivery is expected around the end of the year.
Could you just pause there, Senator Xenophon? Could I ask a question which is very pertinent to this? If in the event that this has been going on for 2 years, and no doubt you'll come back and tell us how it all happened, if in the event there was an accident, who would be legally liable? You can take that on notice if you like, because I think I know the answer. Let's say, I mean, if there was a prang...
I mean, putting my lawyer's cap on, I would have thought you would have been gone for all money legally if anything,
Yeah, no, I
if
think there's a
anything happened. And thank
recognition of
goodness nothing did.
Yeah.
So someone in the organisation
Put you at risk.
authorised or instructed air traffic controllers to go down a path that was completely unauthorised outside the AIP.